Stacey Murphy here, and today we're focused on regenerative entrepreneurship. You'll discover how to share your vision with investors in a way that they understand, so you receive the funding that you need to get started. And why do you care? Well, there's a lot of great ideas floating around, and the difference between people who have great ideas and those who bring those ideas into physical reality, bring them to market, are the ones that can show the business case the best. And if you're redefining a whole sector, rethinking entire systems like a lot of regenerative entrepreneurs are, you're probably not going to bootstrap your business. You're going to be seeking funding and support and partnerships. And so this is going to be critical for you telling this kind of story. Your business, remember, is a vibrant ecosystem. So it includes visionaries like you, it includes operational team, it includes researchers, your clients, your admirers and advisors, who may also include nature, water, etc. And you've also got regulatory bodies, lawyers, and partners, and of course, your investors too. So today, let's talk about that investor side of your business and focus on the money story, market share, and ROI, return on investment. So the great sustainability and regenerative myth is that your vision of a more sustainable and regenerative world is incongruent with money, that the investor's focus is on return on investment. And the myth that we're going to bust here is that, we're here focusing on impact and they're only focusing on returns. So there's two things first here to realize if we're going to bust this myth. The first thing is to recognize that investors are actually always focused on impact, even though it may not seem like it. This really is a misunderstanding that they're focused just on returns and not on impact. So investors see business as, I have capital. How much impact can that capital have in the world? Where can I put my money with the biggest impact on the world so I can have more capital to make even larger contributions? That's the business that investors are in. If you were to narrow it down, that's what they're up to. Investors are looking at the market as products and services that people find most valuable. So the market share is going to be larger where people find things valuable. So while they're looking at financial gains, how their money is going to be used and how they can benefit, they're really looking at how much impact that has in the world, and they believe that that represents what the market wants. So there's a question, who's in charge of the flow of money? And it's kind of like a chicken or an egg kind of situation. The investor has capital, but you as the entrepreneur are defining the flow and you're laying the pipelines for that cash. So notice that we are creating and defining new markets all the time. And this is the first piece of this that's critical to understand. Appreciate for a moment where we sit today. There are the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals that people are making promises to meet. There are net zero mandates by the government. This is the people saying what's important now. We're creating a new market through all of this. It's being generated as we speak, and it didn't come out of the blue. This is because the internet has allowed us to come together on important topics in ever-growing numbers. So all those investments in technology to connect us, all that money, I would consider as impact investing. Things like Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, now X. All of that has made it possible. How would we have come together globally and realized the potential of all of us talking about sustainability all at the same time if it weren't for those investments? So I would consider all of those impact investments. But a lot of people look at those investments as purely, they looked at that as, in terms of financial ROI. And so keep in mind, it's not about where we have been, it's about what we're creating today, the market we're creating today. So one of the best things that you can do for yourself, if you are feeling a little bit of a disconnect between sustainability, regenerative world, and money, is to build that bridge for yourself and to bless all of the investments that have been made to date, whether or not you can point to exactly how they benefited us and brought us here. Just know that they did bring us here. So blessing all of the investments that brought us here, even the ones that you think might be questionable.
and even the ones that you might think seem to have done harm from your perspective. So the analogy here that I would use is that from a garden, if you are growing food in a garden, you may demonize the rabbits because they're coming and eating all of your lettuce, or they're coming and eating all of your food. But you may notice after a couple of months that your plants are growing faster and larger than ever before, and you start to realize the potential of all of that rabbit poop that wasn't there before the rabbit was eating your lettuce. So really saying, okay, there's been this ecosystem of investments. I don't really understand how all of them have led us here, but I'm just going to believe that all of it has led us here in a positive way. So that's the first thing. Realize that you and your investors share the desire for impact, and that they talk about this in terms of traction, marketplace, or market share, and ROI. That is their terminology to talk about impact. Whereas our terminology, we're focused on the birds and the oceans and whatever. But the language is different, but we're both focused on making the world a better place through impact, which leads to the second thing, to help bust this myth that impact and money are at odds. So realize that the story of your business is the story of money to investors. So being able to fluently speak that language of money, investment, market share, and ROI is just another lens to see your vision unfolding. It doesn't diminish all of the impact that you're having on the environment and people and planet. It's just seeing it through another lens, almost like a crystal. You're looking at it from one way, they're looking at it from another. So here's what we're going to do today. I'm going to share the story of BK Farmyards and FarmShare as a way to illustrate how to communicate your vision to investors and how not to. You're going to see how an amazing vision failed to scale and how it could have been thriving today had I told the story differently. And then we're going to take those lessons and then apply them to architectural and construction industry today, and whatever your projects are, see what concepts arise for regenerative building products and how to share the financial story. So BK Farmyards and FarmShare, they won a number of entrepreneurial awards starting in 2009, and BK Farmyards was twice a finalist in the Buckminster Fuller Challenge. But we hit a critical point and we couldn't scale. And it was because I couldn't tell the story in a way that the investors understood. So what was BK Farmyards, for those of you who might not know? The heady way that I used to describe it was that BK Farmyards was a decentralized urban farming network where the producers and consumers received incentives to co-create the local food market, growing food right where it was eaten. And the premise of BK Farmyards was that we were focused on the waste of the centralized food system, the fossil fuel consumption that was used in the transportation of food, the methane gases in the landfills from all the food that was discarded, and the amount of food wasted because of the fragility of fresh food and how far it had to travel. And then not to mention all the health impacts of processed foods. So as in the case of systems design and regenerative thinking, all of that is looking at the food system. It takes some time to understand that whole vision and how all the pieces relate to each other. And as I described it, you probably don't necessarily understand the whole thing, and that's okay. But the way that I would describe it today was that it was intending to be the Uber eBay of the urban local food system. So it was a really big vision. FarmShare was a platform that we were designing that was like a social media site incentivizing the connection of all things urban farming to help mitigate climate change. So where do you start if you have this vision of recreating the food system from a more regenerative viewpoint? Where do you start when your vision includes connecting urban farmers to landowners? That was one of the things we needed to do, was to say there's vacant land and there's people who want to grow food. How do we connect them? Where do you start when your vision includes a network of sites, many sites that would network throughout all cities and then ripple out into other cities? That sites that would include composting, vegetable and herb farms, flower farms, and more. Where do you start when your vision includes a new marketplace for all of those goods and services to be sold and exchanged? And then this platform having a rewards program for everybody involved, and then all the regulatory bodies that could offer rewards as well for city services. So where do you start what's your minimum viable product to sell when you have this grand vision of how this system works? How do you get to the heart of the system and say, this thing is the seed that will scale into all of that? And I'm curious where you would start. Today, I might start somewhere else. But at the time, my first step was to prove that there was a market for backyard farmers, that it was a viable profession. So I created a template for somebody who wanted to become a backyard farmer, and I proved it out. I actually went and did it. I said, okay, you need this much land, you need these many people involved. This is the exchange of the money. This is how many CSA members there are for this much land. And this is a template where an urban farmer could earn X amount of dollars in the city and they could have a living. So I proved out that model the first summer of BK Farmyards. And it worked so well that we kept getting bigger and bigger landowners on board. And there was so many people who wanted to be urban farmers that we found that we had to have training programs to help people transition into the model because they didn't know how to be a farmer. So then we had this whole training program thing. It's getting complicated, right? What the heck is this business? So the benefit was that we were creating the market for connecting urban farmers to landowners, because our tagline when we started was, you have the land, we grow the produce. So that made us responsible for training farmers to then grow the produce, because we were telling landowners, if you have the land, we grow the produce. So now we had all these training programs helping people grow food. But notice how it's not this, all of everything I've just described is not really like a minimum viable product of an open source social media platform that connects the dots to build a new system. None of what I just, none of these farms that I was talking about was actually the minimum viable product of a platform, of a technological platform. But the pieces that I was creating were needed in order to create that network. So when we were fundraising for the tech side of this business, investors didn't understand. And that was on me, because people thought we were a farm. It's even in the name, BK Farmyards. So they would ask us, how big is your farm? How many sites is it? How much food are you growing? What's the revenue on that food? And I would say, you're missing the point. And they would say, well, tell us the point. And I couldn't find a way to describe it to them. And so they couldn't read my mind. They didn't understand. So here's what the investors really wanted to know. They wanted to know the traction that we had. And I kept saying the traction was, I have this business model for an urban farmer and we can connect it to landowners and that can scale up. And so then they were focused on that. But if you really look at the traction in terms of clients and users in the situation that we were creating, I shouldn't have been referencing the impact of the backyard farms. That wasn't what we were building. The traction I should have been telling the story of is the tens of thousands of people who are engaged in our open source platform. And I'll say platform in air quotes, because we were using Google Sheets and Google Calendars. This is back in 2009. So we were using whatever was available to help people self-organize. It was nutty what was happening. People were self-organizing, tens of thousands of people. So do you hear the difference between tens of thousands of people self-organizing to create urban farms and to sell local food, and for restaurants and city agents, like everybody was working together and self-organizing? How different that is from saying, we have this many farms, this is the business model of a, do you hear the difference? You probably do, right? And so if I had told that story, do you think I would have gotten a different investor? Probably. So when people are building a tech platform, it starts with beta users. And we had a huge audience and they were totally hooked on what we were doing. And we had tons of media. We were on everything. Martha Stewart, David Letterman, like you name it. We were on every social media. It was crazy. We were exploding. So the next thing that investors want to know, if I had said our traction is tens of thousands of beta users. Okay, cool. Now what? Now they want to know the market share. So investors want to know, when this thing is successful, what is, I'm going to throw a couple terms at you here, TAM, SAM, SUM. And some of you already know this. And those words are TAM, SAM, and SOM. And what those stand for is they want to know, what is the total addressable market, the largest market you can describe for your product or service. So I'll break this down in a minute for what it would mean for BK Farmyards and FarmShare. But first, let me just go through the terms. So TAM, total of addressable market. Who could we address with our products and services? And then the next level down, that's the total. Now, your ability to hit that total is, you're going to have other people doing similar things than you. There's going to be other things that are just better at it than you, like certain aspects than you. So then there's the second layer down, which is smaller, and that is the serviceable available market. And that is the market that your product could address, because somebody else might have this segment of the market addressed a little bit better than you. So what is the serviceable available market that you have for your product or service? And then there is SOM, which is the serviceable obtainable market. This is the market you can reach today with the resources that you have available. And so this is where investors are saying, okay, if we gave you X amount of dollars, how much more serviceable, obtainable market can you reach with this money? So this is how valuations are made around businesses. So these are three critical ideas that you need to put into your pitch deck to tell the money story. This is the financial story of how much money you need to get your minimum viable product to the next stage where the business can transition and your valuation increases, investors get their money back, they can go invest in something else, or double down on you and give you more money to get to the next stage. So these are the things that they're looking at. Now, sometimes defining your market share is difficult because you're creating something totally new, right? Doesn't exist. It's coming from a totally different mindset, this regenerative mindset. Nothing like this exists. But you have to do this. Otherwise, your investor will never understand. They don't understand why it's important. If you can't show a financial picture that's in the billions or trillions, why do they even want to, why would they even talk to you? So I'm going to take an example that maybe you can understand outside of the regenerative world. So take Uber for a minute. When they were putting together their pitch deck, they could say that their total available market is people looking for taxis. But that's not accurate, because what they found and what they realized is that once anybody can be a driver and anybody can be a rider, and it's just about that service that matches them, people no longer just need a taxi ride. They might decide to leave their car at home and get a ride to the bar, or there's lots of other layers. So people who otherwise wouldn't use taxis may now use an Uber. So the total addressable market is much bigger than just replacing taxis. And that's when investors really sat up to take notice. So here's what I would do differently today to define the farm share market. See if this makes sense to you. So I would look at the market share of the local food system in the United States first. I would just focus on the United States market. And it's probably in the billions, I don't know, maybe the trillions. I don't know the exact numbers right now. That's how much food that people are buying from local food sources, right? So we're basically, FarmShare is about creating local farms, connecting the dots to create a local food system. And so these are people who are already interested in buying local food that would buy from us. So I'm looking at, okay, how many billions of dollars are there for the local food in the United States? Now, then that's not really my market, right? Because I'm not the one earning the money from that. I'm the platform that's connecting the dots to do that. So I would look at the benefits from connecting all the dots. And if I had pitched this business model of accruing fees for all the exchanges that we were allowing, we're selling from here to there, this person's taking this material, depositing it here, all those material exchanges that we're having. If I had crafted the story of how many exchanges there were in proportion to how many users, and then extrapolated that value out, we could have essentially created a new local food marketplace. So we could have used the banking model and said, if we had that local market share of food and multiplied it by a 1% to 2% fee, we take fees for helping to connect all those dots, that might be one way to calculate that TAM. But there's more to that picture, which is I would look at the data that we were collecting about the ecosystem, because in the process of all those exchanges, we had numbers about how much food was getting redirected, how many resources that would have otherwise gone to the landfill that were redirected. And so we had conversations with the mayor back then that he was interested in our impact numbers of how much were we saving him in money for resources that would have gone to the landfill, because he's got to pick up the garbage. And so how much were we helping him in that? And if we could have proven that number, we could have gotten regulatory institutional money that was available for more efficient city infrastructure. So that total addressable market could have been even bigger than just the exchanges that we were talking about on that market platform. So that just gives you a little sense of how I was not telling the story that I should have been telling to investors. And then, I would have looked, I'm not going to go into the details, but then I would have started to look at, okay, what would be the serviceable, addressable market right now, and helped an investor see what would happen as we scale up. And then I would look at a roadmap for, if you gave us X amount of dollars, this is how much we could scale this up. And that would help give that valuation of what the business is worth. So do you see how that is the financial story that the investor needs to hear? And if that total available market, and that's even if the serviceable available market, if those are in the billions and trillions, then an investor says that's a lot of impact. That's their version of impact, is like, that's a big number. And if I can invest in that, and that business grows, then we can make more money and we can have a bigger impact. So that's that link between that word impact for them. So your financial story, the big thing I want to share here is that your financial story in your pitch deck, it has to be congruent with what you're building. So the reason investors are not investing is that the financial story is either not existent, meaning you can't tell it because you don't know what it is. The number, you're not really seeing that market share that's possible on that large scale. Or your financial story of what you're telling is incongruent with what you're doing. In the case of what I was doing, I was telling an incongruent story. And so nobody understood what we were doing. So you have to take your planet beneficial impact, helping to connect and be in harmony with nature, connecting our systems, be in harmony with nature, to take that hat off, that regenerative hat off for a minute, and just really look through the lens of the investor for a minute as you're creating your pitch deck. And what happens is you're going to see opportunities you didn't see before. You may even see the financial story is simply about exchange, which is actually the story of nature, if you really look at it. Exchanging one form of energy for another. That's all the cash flow is doing. So you're creating the market with the regenerative movement. You truly are creating the market, because these are things that don't yet exist. You're generating that market. You're telling the story of that market. You're getting investors on board with that market. And together, we're creating the regenerative economy. And you are in the perfect place at the perfect time. Everything has led us here. So I wanted to share this story today because hopefully it'll reframe your vision to include the financial story in your vision, so you can receive the funds that you need to launch and scale. And so here are some of the questions that I'm asking myself currently for the regenerative economy, specific to architecture and construction. So the story I just told was about the food system. And I think that there is definitely ways in which FarmShare could be funded today and could be a part of city infrastructure, could be considered architecture. And I'm definitely exploring that. But I'm also asking about the built world and what materials we're using to build. So some of the questions that I'm asking currently are, what is the market of seaweed? What is the value of the seaweed economy? What is the value of the mushroom economy? What is the value of the hemp economy? These are all building materials that regenerate quickly, that are have massive benefits for carbon sequestration and can be transformed into many types of materials that we can use in our buildings. So how do we measure those economies? What are the market numbers that we're going to put next to those materials? But then also looking at what are the largest market segments of typical materials that could disrupt the construction industry. For example, let's say you take a material like PVC piping, and you say, okay, well, PVC piping is a plastic material that's used for a lot of in-ground piping. It has a lot of different applications, and people believe it's necessary as the only material that is going to transport water and hold up over time. And so people say, well, we're always going to need plastics. We're always going to need PVC piping. PVC piping represents a $129 billion industry. So if we could create it out of another material and we could use it in underground applications and have it not necessarily break down, we could really alter construction in a massive way. So I'm looking at, okay, what are some of the products that could be disrupted? Things like rebar. So there's a steel rebar. It's currently being disrupted a little bit by fiberglass. They've been finding that there's really big benefits to this. It's lighter weight, so you can transport it with less fossil fuels. It's just as strong as the steel version, but then it doesn't corrode. And so you don't have the breakdown of the materials. You don't have the separation that happens between the concrete and the rebar when you have it as metal. And so they built a bridge 30 years ago, and it's in way better shape than any bridge made with steel rebar. So there's some materials that are available in the architectural industry that we could disrupt that would be large market shares. And then the other thing I'm thinking about is concrete and steel are not only two of the largest market segments out there, they represent a lot of money, but also these are the ones that are contributing most to climate change. And so, of course, we're going to look at these. But it's not only about the products that we're going to replace them with, like, building a kelp block that replaces concrete block, or a fiberglass rebar instead of a steel rebar. But it's also about all that infrastructure that we have that produces concrete and steel, that infrastructure could be recycled to make something else. So we don't want to throw away all of these things. It wouldn't be regenerative if we said, okay, this is what we're doing today. That's where we want to go. Let's just throw all this stuff out. That's not really how nature works. So the question is, what are we doing with all that infrastructure? And maybe there's opportunities there that if we looked at it through that lens, we might see a very fast, easy solution. So that's what I wanted to share today. And now I want to open up the discussion here. Your thoughts about today, your questions, how you might apply what you heard today to your investor pitch decks, and what other questions you're asking to help you identify your financial story, the size of your market that you're addressing, and why investors should care. And because we're recreating entire systems, it's critical to find those right building blocks that are going to help build the rest. So I'm going to open up the floor and hear what you all have to say.